All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Welch, for sharing that documentary with us. And I can do a little bit of an introduction of Dr. Welch. So I previously introduced myself. My name is Alicia Johnson. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I am the director of the Women's Center at the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh. And we are co-hosting this event along with our Indigenous Student Support and Wellness, as well as our Intertribal Student Council. And so I am pulling up Dr. Welch's bio quickly. So we overlap. We have a shared connection to the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, where we both completed our PhD. Dr. Welch is a member of the Eastern Cherokee Tribe and is an assistant professor of sport management at Linfield University. She has worked with the Tides Institute on racial and gender report cards, in event management at Disney, ESPN, Wide World of Sports, marketing with Nike's Native American Initiative, N7, and production and media at Wieden+Kennedy. And so welcome again. And I will turn it over to you to see if you wanted to share any initial just like reactions after watching it again, I'm sure for the 100th time.
It's funny because when you're in the editing process, you definitely get kind of like not sick of it, but you just kind of get you definitely get to a point where you're like, okay, I've seen this so many times. But now when I watch it, it's just I like get teary-eyed every time because it just came together so well. And I do want to acknowledge that I'm joining from McMinnville, Oregon. So it's traditional territory of the Yamhill Band of the ᎠᎰța tribe, and which is now known as the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde. So they're just right down the road from us, the Confederated Tribes. And it's funny because I actually just connected with someone from there who's a lacrosse, kind of a lacrosse coach, and just it's crazy just where stickball, the connection stickball has taken me to. And I just want to acknowledge, everyone that was in the film, and all the women that I talked to, all the community members that I talked to, and there's plenty of people who I haven't got the chance to talk to, and I look forward to doing that because, it's so hard to capture something like this for an entire community. And so I just really, the best part is when I see people that are just proud of it and happy with it being out there and being a story. And it's just something that like I hope that we can do more for our community, is be able to like capture these stories and have them and preserve them. And I know our tribe's really working hard on doing that kind of stuff with talking to more elders. And Jerry in the film, we talked with him and met with him, and it wasn't even a couple months and he passed, and we're just so thankful that we were able to spend that time with him and kind of soak up his knowledge and have some of the footage of him from calling games and stuff like that. So it really felt really like kind of serendipitous to have that happen. And this project actually evolved really kind of very interesting how it evolved out of really kind of just kind of a whim, honestly. My advisor at Tennessee, he has traveled to Cherokee and he's pretty familiar with the area, and so he encouraged me to do research on stickball. And I was looking more big picture at like Native athletes kind of across the United States, more based like more about them playing in college and more kind of the more modern Native athlete. And so I'd been around stickball growing up, but I didn't really think twice about it. And he encouraged me to look into stickball as kind of a research topic. And I was definitely hesitant at first. So I was like, I don't know. And it felt, I don't know, just kind of, I wasn't sure. I was so focused on like the modern stuff. And I'm just so glad now that he kind of pushed me in that direction, because I started by talking to a lot of the men that I went to high school with who played, and some too that were older and younger, but really reconnecting with the men that were my age and like talking to them about something I'd never really talked to them about before, and about how culturally significant it was to them. Like I just didn't realize, because you can go to games and be in the community and kind of see stickball but not really understand like all that goes into it and all the kind of the spirituality, the cultural significance of it. And I'm just so thankful that I was able to do that. And as I was having these conversations with all the men, I kept hearing people talk about, well, what about the women? You know, you need to talk to the women that played, because that kind of early 2000s era, I was in middle school at the time. And so I remember actually, because I had friends that played, because there were young girls that played, but I remember just being kind of terrified because it was so rough. And I was like, there was no way I thought I could ever play. I was pretty timid as an athlete. And so being able to go back now and then talk to those women, and even some I hadn't even really met before, but it was kind of like this instant bond and this instant connection over this game. And hearing the women just talk about how much it meant to them, like Jerry on the film, like talking about how freeing it was. Like I literally just was so motivated to I just wanted to play. I just was so ready. We did a little thing outside of one of our community centers where we were kind of playing around one day, and it just was like the best feeling ever. It was just such a great, just the energy was so great. And we were kind of talking about, you know, maybe we'll get it going again. And at the time I was still in Knoxville, working on my PhD. And then I think that was kind of right before kind of COVID hit, and then everything kind of shifted. But the film actually, interestingly enough, came about because I was determined when I went back to do my PhD, I didn't just want to write a dissertation. I wanted to actually produce something that my community could really be more easily accessible to not just my community, but to everyone. And film for me is a huge thing, and something I had some professional experience with. And so I was kind of connected with two students at Tennessee at the time who had been kind of doing documentary filmmaking. They had been doing stuff for the athletics department and filming games basically, and doing all this stuff with big time athletics. And it was so great because they had all the professional experience with cameras and all this stuff, even as undergrads, that I would have never been able to do the kind of the work that they did. We brought a drone to shoot some of that footage, and just their skill, even at an undergrad level, was so great. And so being connected with them, there's kind of an instant connection too with them, and just their willingness to learn and kind of soak up kind of the culture, and come over to Cherokee and spend time with these women, and kind of go rogue in how we were filming. We were really just kind of flying by the seat of our pants a lot of times, just trying to connect with people and get them on camera, and going to the festival that happens every year. And we did several shoots in Cherokee. And so it was really nice to have that team, and also have them as kind of the outsiders too, who there were certain things they didn't know, that they weren't, questions that I just took for granted, or things that I took for granted, and they just were really adamant about kind of making sure they were getting a full picture so that anyone could watch the film and kind of understand what's happening. And so this was actually the test project for my dissertation. My dissertation was actually on college athletes giving back to their community. And I did do a documentary for that one, but I did that one on my own. It was nowhere near as good as this one. And this one turned out to be just really the hit of the two. And I just counted, we got accepted to 7 film festivals. We still have a couple pending. And we got nominated for an Emmy in the kind of Southwest or Southeast region for the Emmys, regional Emmys, because we actually aired on PBS in Tennessee, Kentucky, and North Carolina. And so just having that exposure, it was more than I could ever ask for. And the connections that I've made, I feel like every couple of days, I feel like I talk to someone new or meet someone new, either with lacrosse or with something connected with the Native culture and sports. And it's funny because everyone was like, well, what about this game and this tribe? And there's so much that I could focus on stickball for the rest of my life and never be done. And there's so many other games out there. So it's kind of that constant battle of trying to choose between what you want to focus on. But this has been, just been so rewarding. And the women, and I still owe some of the women some actual DVD copies, because I know many of them still have their DVD players and want to share it with their families. And so that's definitely still something I want to do. I want to have a screening in Cherokee. That was something we were trying to get lined up at the theater before kind of COVID hit. And so that's still something that we want to do, is have some sort of screening. I've been talking a lot to the guys at the museum. One of my classmates is kind of directing the museum now in Cherokee, and so we've been talking about putting together some sort of like film festival type of thing. And yeah, it's just been so cool to see the response. And there's definitely been a few people who weren't as happy with it. I understand that too, because it was hard to tell the whole story, because like there's plenty of women that I didn't get to talk to and didn't get to talk, just didn't get to tell their story, which I isn't really unfortunate, but I tried to do my best and create a representation that was positive. And it ultimately too, I was thinking about being Women's History Month and how important this kind of movement is with women's sports. Like growing up for me, I never experienced like women being less than. Like I was really raised by a strong mom, strong grandma. My great grandma was alive and in my life for most of my life. And so, and I remember like our women's basketball team winning state championship, and it was like I never felt like it was like second class sport, how like a lot of people talk about women's sports. And I think that just goes to show kind of like our society and how women are valued in our culture. And so it's really cool to kind of tell that story as well, and show that like even though it may have not been for a very long time, these women did something that was really, really important, really empowering, and really culturally significant. And yeah, I could ramble on forever, but it's such a cool piece, I think, to show kind of just the strength and the resilience and like just the fun too. Like a lot of times our communities are taken everything's so serious, and it's very much like all about despair and the overt challenges that we have to overcome. But I love approaching things from like positivity aspect and like the positive things that we've been able to do, and kind of we had to overcome, but like so many other positive things about our culture that still live on and that still are kind of happening. And and it just makes me really homesick too. And I see you, Layla, on from Cherokee, and like I'm just so happy to see people from home, and makes it really great.
I do have a question. Do you know, or were you able to find in your research like how that history of women playing got lost? Like was it through colonization, even though it was sort of recorded by a colonizer? Like
that's what's funny, is finding that it was kind of weird, because the women, actually a lot of women were doing this research on their own too, and especially when they started playing again, and they wanted to find proof to show other people that like, hey, we did play. And so the fact that we kind of relied on this kind of colonizers documentation for that is kind of ironic thinking back. But I think it is kind of, because we just didn't have, not our kind of traditions is more of oral storytelling, so we didn't have written records of this kind of thing. And like they've gone back now and found cave kind of inscriptions of people talking about stickball, and so I think it makes sense to me also that like our women were playing, but then when the settlers came to the US, that like they saw the women playing, thought it was barbaric and thought it wasn't ladylike, and so they basically stopped it then. And so makes sense to me that that's when women would stop playing, because they're trying to fit into that new cultural mode. And kind of Cherokees are kind of known too for being some of the like most kind of civilized, all the civilized tribes, like one of the most kind of civilized that adapted to survive. And so it makes sense to me that it would kind of fade away at that time. There's also Jerry talked about it just being too violent, and that it got too violent, and women were starting to like die and lose their lives, and so they kind of stopped it for that reason too. And what I learned from doing this project, one of the biggest things I learned was like there wasn't like just one moment that stopped everything. Like it just kind of, I think with most things in life, it kind of just ebbs and flows, and it fades and it comes back, and it's not just for one reason, but it's kind of a multitude of things. Because even when the women talked about how they thought, well, maybe they stopped playing because they all were having kids and they all were like just super busy. And it's like, well, the women playing had kids, like, and that never stopped them before. So it wasn't, I don't think it was that. I think it was kind of just a combination of things, and kind of where things kind of society and kind of individual kind of pressures are, and families and things like that.
Anybody who's on wants to ask a question, feel free to drop it in the chat or unmute.
Could I ask a question real quick?
Absolutely.
Sure.
Okay, so I found this really interesting, and I just didn't know if stickball is it like just like one game that they play like once a year at the meetings, or is it like a league where like they play multiple games, kind of like the NBA or MLB or anything like that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And it's definitely not anywhere near as organized. Well, actually, I shouldn't say that, because I think they are very organized, kind of the leaders of these communities. But what kind of happens is every community has, and we have kind of 7 communities on the reservation, and everyone plays like all their rec ball through that community. Just kind of like how you divide into districts, I guess, is how I would kind of relate it to. But so I kind of grew up, and like, you're very prideful of your community. Like, I'm from Wolftown, and I'm very prideful of being in Wolftown. And so Wolftown had a stickball team, and then, Big Cove had a stickball team, and so they would not necessarily, they would do a lot of more like exhibition type games, and depending on the year too. There could be a year where there's like a ton of exhibition games, but every year Fall Festival, which is the first week of October, that's kind of like the time when stickball is kind of put on display, and like it's not just for our community, but it's for like the public. And so there's other pieces that aren't for the public, that don't kind of get touted, but yeah, normally it's community, and it's very much a community in that, like, they have gatherings for food and all the other like kind of fundraiser type of things, or to practice. They have practice, but it's normally kind of that like late summer, early fall kind of, this like kind of the season. But there's definitely games that happen. Kind of exhibition games have become really popular, where a team or a community will go to a school or university and have a game. And we've been talking about doing that at Tennessee for a bit now too, but definitely not as kind of like traditional in the fact, or organized in the fact that you think of like with your professional sports. But there's definitely there's the community kind of group aspect of it, and like the girl said, it's very familial too. Like, the families are a big part of that, and where that comes from. And we have kids that play kind of a kids league, and the girls talked about how like they would know when their sons are ready. And so we have the kids, and we actually have the seniors too that play, kind of the older guys that play. And so it's interesting to see kind of those dynamics between those different groups, because there's not like a cutoff of an age or anything. It's very much just kind of like I think it's very much more kind of where you're at in life and where you feel you should be. And the women still are involved too, very much in the men's side of the game. Like, when you see all the boys at the end kind of coming together and their lines, and when they do that, the women are usually standing behind the men and like the support system for them. And so yeah, it's definitely organized, but not kind of I'm trying to think of the word, like, definitely not kind of more corporate, I guess, is how I don't know what word I'm looking for, but it's not as kind of business like, I guess, as we think of other sports, where it's a lot more kind of scheduled, like, oh, we're going to play X in this game, and like they'll have like games scheduled, but it's not, nothing is kind of permanent or anything like that. But it's the fall festival time is really the most kind of. And that was one thing I think they didn't play the year of COVID, but I think they actually did play some games last year, and they weren't sure if they were going to be able to do that. But it was really hard. COVID was really hard on this and on our community in general, just because we are such a gathering kind of community. And so I'm really just glad that they've been able to keep it going a little bit. And I think it definitely was a resurgence after a couple of years of kind of not as many teams or many players, and I think we're starting to really see that resurgence come about. Layla, what do you think?
I honestly, I really enjoyed the presentation. I'm proud of you.
Thank
Uh,
you.
and it really just made me go back and think, because I watched some of the women play and they were rough, very rough.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the reasons, again, it kind of faded out. But
Yeah.
I enjoyed it. And I really would like to see it again myself,
Yeah.
just to see how some of these younger women coming up are, you've got a lot of great athletes out there, native athletes that I would love to see out on the field. So
Yeah.
it was wonderful. I loved it. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, thank you. And I'll send you the link too, so you can watch it on your own too.
Okay.
No, it's funny because we started playing soccer when I was in high school. We didn't have a soccer team at Cherokee until I was a junior in high school. And, we didn't even have a youth league at that time either. And so when we started playing, a lot of the girls I played with, the Hicks girls, they had played stickball, and they were like so brutal in soccer because they were just used to playing stickball, and like they kind of just translated it to soccer. And I feel like there was like not very many games where we didn't get a red card because they were always getting really into it, and we're just so tough to play against. And I watched lacrosse. So here at Linfield, we have a women's lacrosse team. And the guy at Grand Ron who coaches, he's actually helping coach the women's lacrosse team now, which is so cool to see that kind of come full circle. And the girls lacrosse, women's lacrosse is so different from men's lacrosse. Like the fact that they're not able to they're not really able to hit at all. It's just not as kind of physical as the men's game. And I haven't watched that much lacrosse before that anyways, but just seeing the women play, I'm just like, man, it feels a little bit like a bummer, because it's like, man, I've seen women do this, like, and I would love to see our lacrosse isn't really a big sport in kind of in our area, but I would love to see some of that translate over. We've had the Thompson brothers from lacrosse, kind of the Iroquois lacrosse, come and do camps, and it's so cool to see the kids pick up lacrosse sticks, because it's almost just like second nature because they've played stickball or they have some familiarity with it. And so I feel like if we ever did really like invest into that lacrosse and had other teams to play, I think it would be really, really cool to have that dynamic, because there is like that. Literally, I tell people all the time, I'm like, it's literally what lacrosse was born out of. And I've learned that, like, the Iroquois, they're kind of have the similar longer sticks, bigger sticks, and obviously we had two sticks and they're smaller. And so it's cool to see the differences in Mississippi Choctaw and some of the other tribes across the Southeast, like have just variations of it, but it's all kind of, you can see the similarities with lacrosse and how lacrosse kind of evolved out of it. And it's funny because, people think of lacrosse as kind of like a privileged, preppy, white male sport. And it's like, man, if you knew about all the native history, I think there's more of that happening now, like the Premier Lacrosse League, the owner of that. And then he's really close with the Thompson brothers, and he's really adamant about like doing the kind of native recognition stuff. And so it's fun to kind of just help people put the connections together. Another project, it's funny, when I was working for Nike, one thing I worked on was doing some ads and placements in the lacrosse, Inside Lacrosse magazine is I think what it was called. And so like, that was probably almost 10 years ago now at this point. But when I started teaching again, I had kind of someone random reach out to me, and they were like, yeah, I'm the owner of Inside Lacrosse magazine, and someone told me about you and how you like were familiar with stickball. And he's doing a whole entire film about just like the history of lacrosse. And he has one of like the traditional like Iroquois lacrosse stick makers, Alfie Jock, who is kind of infamous in the stickball, like stick making world. And so he's kind of the main subject of the film, but it's also just about the evolution of lacrosse. And he's been working on this thing for years. And he brought me on. He originally just brought me on to help like get permission to use certain photos, or like just try to make some more connections with the Native community. And then once he realized like I had all this other production experience, I showed him my film, it's been a really cool, like just being added on to the team, and trying to really, and I've been fighting a lot for like, okay, we have to make sure the women's side is like accurately portrayed, because you don't want to just really it's oftentimes when women's pieces of things get covered, it's like a like kind of a side piece, right? It's not a main focus, but I want to make sure the women get their due in the lacrosse film. And the Haudenosaunee and the Iroquois and all those tribes that now have a lot of women involved in the game. It's still controversial. It's still not, it's funny because it's almost like seeing how we've almost ourselves been colonized and how we've been taught what the gender roles are. And so it's funny to try to like unpack that and try to really think back about, okay, what would we do traditionally? You know, what would that actually look like for us? And for every tribe's different, every group's different. And so it's just so fun to learn, and like working, so just randomly connecting to this guy about the stickball and the lacrosse, and hopefully that film will be coming out soon too. It's going to be like feature length. I think he's got so many connections that I think we could definitely get it like on ESPN or something. I think that'll be really great. And it's taught me so much just about lacrosse that I didn't even know, you know, about the kind of the powerhouse lacrosse teams, because you don't really grow up learning about that. And it's just cool to kind of put those connections together.
Maybe at least on Disney Plus.
I know, right? I know. I've been trying to get ESPNW for this for a while, so I'm still trying to like push it through there. So, but it's been so rewarding to connect with people. I just connected with a student who's at Cornell, and he's doing his thesis on kind of comparison of the traditional game versus like modern lacrosse. And so we're actually talking next week, and it's just like random connections, but there is such a passion for lacrosse and for sport in general that it's fun to kind of bridge these gaps between kind of the native and non-native world. And just I think it's just really nice to see that happen. And then now too, with like kind of the gender dynamics too, with women, female, male, and all that. And so I look forward to too when like I don't know if we'll, and some tribes do a mixed game, a women's and men's game, and I would love to kind of see us try to do something like that. Because you know, with following everything that's going on in sports with transgender athletes, like all that stuff, it's like, yeah, you know, the lines aren't, you know, we always live in this binary of women, man, yes, no. It's like, well, there always is kind of an in between too, and I think we would want to acknowledge that as well.
Yes. One of the quotes that I wrote down that I think was really powerful is when one of the women shared that they were trying to get back to who we are. And I was wondering if you could reflect on that quote in connection with like what this research means to you, and also what sport means to you in connecting to like who you are and connecting to your cultural heritage.
Yeah, well, it's funny, I was just thinking, so my dog up here, so my grandpa, his whole family's from Cherokee, grew up in Cherokee, and he has beagles, and his grandpa or his dad kind of got him into playing stickball, and he tells me stories all the time of how his dad would give him like a quarter or a nickel or something if he got a goal in a game, and how he used that to buy like his first hunting gun. And that was like, he still has that gun to this day. And it's things like that just like, there's no book, there's no movie, there's no anything that means as much as that, you know, that having that family connection, that family tradition. And even though I haven't played, just being able to be around it and being able to connect with these people. And I think for so long we've been like told to not practice, or told not to like really embrace our Cherokee, our traditions, and it's been wiped so clean for so long. And so now we're all just trying to, I think, get back to it as much as we can. And like I hate that I like didn't take my Cherokee language class more seriously when I was in the high school, right? And the fact that we only had like, when I was in high school, we only had like one year of it, you know. It's like, man, we should do that every year, right? Like in those kind of things. And so to see now that we have the immersion school and we have these things that we're having kids learn Cherokee before they learn English, like that's the kind of stuff that just is like really, really amazing. for me too, it's really hard not being home. But I just did a panel this morning where I was, just representing women in sport, and to be able to say, like, I worked at Nike and I've worked at all these places, and I'm a professor of sport management. I don't know another Native woman who's a professor of sport management. Like, and for me, being in a classroom and being able to tell these students who are mostly white male, like, about where I come from and my traditions, and show them these kind of things, I think that just helps all of us. And I think it helps just spread that, like, kind of awareness of who we are, and like, we're not gone, we're not extinct, we're not, just, isolated to one area, but we're still here. And so I love that quote too. And that every time the Bark sisters, it just makes me cry, because they're just like, it's just so fun to see them, and like, just how bonded they are through something like that. Because it's like deeper than blood. It's something that is really indescribable. And I'm just feel lucky to be able to have those relationships. And like, I don't talk to everyone every day, but like, I can message Sherry and like, or message some of the girls in the film, and like, now we have that bond, and we have that connection. And everyone's like, what's your next film going to be on? And I have ideas. I have plenty of ideas. And so that's the thing too. I like, that 96 championship team, I want to like go back and do a documentary about that, because it was like one of the most dominant women's basketball teams I've ever seen. But yeah, it really is. Sport for us is a cultural expression. It's not just kind of a physical or even just a mental expression. It's a really cultural thing for us, and the cultural pride that comes with that. And all the way back to like boarding schools, and the sports were almost a way to almost get us to assimilate, but we took sport and we made it our own. And we already had our own games that people didn't know about, but we took sport and we made it our own, and we made it something that could be an extension of our identity, our culture, our spirituality, all these pieces that people don't necessarily understand or see. And I was really adamant too. Some of the guys invited me to come to some of the kind of ceremonial things that happen that are just among the players. And I was just like, I wasn't comfortable doing that, just because as much as I was curious, I wasn't trying to be like the scientist that goes behind the scenes to see and reveal kind of the secrets. Because there's been plenty of books, there's been really good books written about stickball, and but it's always come kind of from this outsider perspective. And it, half the time, honestly, I laugh, because I've heard of people who like would just tell stories to the white men who came to just basically just give them crazy stories too. And so I take everything I read with a grain of salt, because I'm like, who knows who they were talking to and what they were telling them. But I think that part is sacred, and it's, it needs to be protected, and it needs to be, even me, I didn't feel quite comfortable with that, just because I wasn't in that kind of in that place. But and there's something special about that. Like, I think people are always wanting to know everything about everything, and like, there's something special about the mystery, kind of the magic of the kind of the medicine, going back to the Disney days. There's something special, about the magic part, the kind of the stuff that you don't always see.
Yeah, I feel like that research and connection, being part of the community, it's so important, because there is that long history of extraction and not giving back to the community or involving the community in the process of sharing the results, and letting the community decide what the impact is, right? And so yeah, that was cool.
Thanks for mentioning that, because I recently gave a presentation kind of talking about that topic as well, because for so long, research in the Native community has been like a dirty word, because it's like an outsider coming in, taking what they want, and then leaving and getting published or getting, books or anything written. And like, and the Native community never sees anything again. And I was just talking to my friend who works at the museum about this, because we were talking about, bringing over students that are like kind of museum curators and things like that, or into kind of the museum library type of stuff. And it is that constant, like, balance of, wanting to keep sacred things sacred, but also wanting to make sure that we're not losing records and not losing the history. And thankfully with technology now, we have so many different ways to do that. But for me, yeah, I was just so thankful for that I was able to be trusted in the community. And I still feel like research in the Native community, it's never done. Like it's never over. You're always continually doing it, because a lot of times people think of research as like, oh, I'm going to start this project and I'll finish it and I'm published and I'm done. And it's like, for me, it's like it's never done. Even though it may kind of sit on the back burner for a little while, it's always got to be in your life. And I tell people all the time too, I'm like, if you want to do something research with the Native community, think about what they need. Like what research do they need done? Like where are the gaps in their history? And I wasn't quite wise enough, I don't think, to know it at the time, but like I definitely could have approached it more from like, okay, what do you guys like? And the Native communities often don't know either. I think it has to be a collaboration. It can't just be like someone saying, well, I'm going to do research on X, Y, and Z, and I'm going to go to this reservation, or I'm going to go to this tribe and do it. And then there also has to be, like, I told my friend this, like, make sure you get to read everything before it's submitted or published or anything like that. Like, you get to have that ownership, and we get to have that now. Like, I think for so long our communities kind of didn't know better to like know what to even ask for. And so now I think that we have so much more kind of tech savvy, so much more knowledge, that we're able to kind of really set the terms of what research can be. And I still hope that there's plenty of people out there. I know a student who she's doing her thesis right now on Native athletes, and she's non-Native. She's actually a Black female, and but we need her. We need people like her to do that work and to commit to doing that work and doing it in a meaningful way, and doing it in a collaborative way. Like she's reached out to several Native kind of researchers about how she should go about it. And so I think just realizing that you can't really operate in a silo or kind of independently. You have to really be having that relationship with the community. And it really is a relationship. It's not a one-time kind of fly in, fly out thing. It's got to be something that's long-term.
I feel like this is related, but I think that students might be curious about, what it's like to work at Disney and Nike in what I'm assuming are very white and male dominated spaces, and advocating for the inclusion of Native athletes. So if you could share a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because it's funny because you when you go to school, when you leave kind of your home community, you don't know kind of what was different about your experience, because it's all you know. And then when you start talking to people and you're like, oh, not everyone is like super close with their cousins, and not everyone like does all these community gatherings, and not everyone is just eating dinner with their grandpa every Sunday afternoon, like this, just the simple things like that. And so once you learn those like things that are different, it's a lot easier to relate. But it's also you're kind of constantly, I feel like I was very introverted, and especially when I went to undergrad. But then the more I started talking about my culture and my background, the more kind of empowered I felt by it. And it also forced me to also do my own, further educating and like learning and reading and talking to people and asking questions of my family. And I was lucky enough to work in my family's bookstore in Cherokee. That was kind of a Native bookstore. And so I learned really so much just doing that with my grandma. And I totally just lost my train of thought. But yeah, so we're going to grad school and going to like these big universities, and then seeing just how small we were. And like, and Central Florida and Orlando is very diverse in the sense that there's a lot of international students, there's a lot of international representation, but there's, not a huge, Native population, Native representation. And even Disney, like you think about some of the films Disney's made and like some of the old cartoons with like Native representation, it's not great. And honestly, you take that stuff kind of for granted. You don't think about it as much, but when you start to get into these spaces and you realize like people, people will talk about being Cherokee, like they talk about like their favorite color being orange. Like it's like, oh yeah, I'm Cherokee, and it's like, what? And you ask them like who their family is, and it's like, oh, it's like it's always grandma. It's like my great grandma's Cherokee, and it was a Cherokee princess, and like just that understanding of like what it means to be Cherokee is so different. And Cherokee and Navajo, I feel like are the two most common ones that get kind of touted. But when you realize that people don't really understand what that means to you, and so you kind of are trying to educate and explain what it's just a kind of a constant explaining game where you're kind of explain like, yeah, you're still, not only are we still here, but we like have two, we have the Eastern band, we have the Western band, the Cherokee Nation, and like that it's important. Those are two very different things. Somebody put Cherokee Nation on something for me the other day, and I was like, I'm actually Eastern Cherokee, not Cherokee Nation, because that's a big it's very distinguished thing. And it sounds like you're nitpicking, but it's really important. And so just having to constantly kind of really know when to talk about it, and then also know when like, when it's maybe not as appropriate. But it feels like most of the time, if you're at a good place, if you're at a company with a good people, like they're going to value who you are and where you come from. And I've tell my students this all the time. It's like, don't want to work for Nike just to work for Nike. Like, want to work for Nike because you have a passion for something particular at Nike, or you really want to work with the N7 brand because you love what it's done for the Native community. And that will get you way farther than just wanting to work for a brand, because a brand isn't going to love you back. A brand doesn't care about you, but the people do. And like, that's why my old boss at N7, Sam, like he was just texting me the other day because Tennessee had the great SEC championship win. And so he like texted me, he's like, great job with Tennessee. Like those little things like that, like when you find those people like that, and you can find those allies and those advocates, like that's what it's really all about. And finding kind of your I hate saying tribe. I hate when people say tribe, because it's like, ugh, but finding your people, when you can find your people in kind of these spaces, because they're out there, and like you just have to really know when to speak up and when to really fight for that representation. And I always tell people too, I'm like, if you're in doubt, do it. Like don't lean on the other side, lean on the doing it side. And you have to be able to be authentic and be yourself. And you get those questions too, like, well, are you full blood Cherokee? Like those kind of things where it's like, well, do you even know what that means? And like, it's just things like that, where the little questions and the little things here and there. But it is, I try to think of everything as like an opportunity to not only educate, but kind of just like have fun with it. But again, I think our people are so funny. Like my grandpa and my grandma like crack me up. Like they're hilarious. And they're some of the most like humorous people I've ever met in my life. And so really showing people that we have that side as well, and that we have that really great, like just humor, positivity, energy about us that is kind of contagious. But yes, there's definitely been times, especially in academia now, back to like everyone thinks I'm a Native studies professor, and just because I'm Native, and I'm like, actually my expertise is in sport management. And not to knock anyone that's a Native studies professor, but like we can do other things too, right? Like we don't have to just specialize in like our complete identity. So I think that's another thing that's been big for me in academia, is to show that like we can do a lot of different things as well.
Yes. I forgot to ask this earlier on, but so have you played stickball?
So all I've done is kind of a little backyard stuff with my family, and nothing. And my grandpa, actually, the picture of me with the stick is actually one of his old sticks. And when I'm kind of messing around with the girls, but I have not played like an official game, no. And that's something that like is on my bucket list, especially because I'm a lot faster now than I was when I was younger. So I was like, at least I could like outrun people and not get tackled maybe. But one of my best friends from high school, she played, and she actually wrestled. And like that was back when girls weren't wrestling like they are now. And like she just yeah, just the toughness just blows me away. Like I'm like now it's like I'll just run and run away from the hits. But like the way they talk about it though, like it makes you want to run through a wall. Like it makes it like it makes the roughness of it not even seem like a factor. And something I've learned from watching all the games is, and especially the men too, is like there's not really a lot of injuries. And they say that like injuries only happen when someone isn't like following the protocol or following the kind of what the kind of the rules are of like living kind of a clean and healthy lifestyle. And so it's wild, like you don't see that many injuries when what you would think of when you think of like an, you know, you're gonna see an injury in a basketball game mostly every game, right? Like someone's gonna go off the court with an injury, but like you don't really see that as much. And so that just gives me so much kind of faith and like believe so much in kind of the medicine part of the game, of what really it is, just bigger than like the game piece. But that's a really good question. Yeah, I hope that definitely we'll see a day when I'm playing, women are playing again, all ages, all yeah, all that.
I can't wait to see pictures.
Yeah, I know. I'm so excited. I'm like, maybe this summer, because I'm definitely going back this summer for, I'm gonna do a session with some of our adult leadership, and actually about mascots, totally different topic, but I'm sure we'll try to get together and talk some stickball, or maybe we'll do the screening there at the theater. I'm just like, I want to have an event where we can bring all the women together that were in the film and like let them have kind of their moment, because seeing them watching them watch it, and especially when their kids were watching it and like seeing the old footage of them, like that was the coolest thing. And I had to shout out one of my best friends from high school, Tiffany Panther. She's the one whose footage that we use. Like her family recorded the games, and like having that raw footage, like the film would have been nothing without that. Like that was the absolute like kind of crux of it. And to have all that footage, which is amazing, the sound that you got from the crowd and the oohs and the ahs and like that natural sound is like just something you just don't get a lot of. So having that was just crucial to the project. And photos and all these other old things, like the museum was great about like just digging up old photos and newspaper clippings and things like that. And so it was really, and even the Timberlake piece was actually in University of Tennessee's collection, like kind of, I can't remember like what they called it, but I had to like go in with gloves, and like I couldn't even really touch the stuff. They had like, they would show it to me and I could take pictures of it, but I couldn't really touch it. That's like one of their old kind of historic archives. That was really, really cool. And meeting people too, like at the library, who still to this day like follow me and like now follow the film. It's like those little things like that are just so special. So now, Alicia, we got to get you out to Cherokee and get you there for the screening. That's the next step.
I'm there.
Yeah.
Does anybody else have any questions or thoughts?
Yeah. And thank you all so much. Like this has been amazing. It's kind of one of the first one of these I've done. And we're actually going to do one here at Linfield on the 30th. If people want to join, we're going to have the directors come on and talk a little bit too about their experience, which is great because like being kind of two young white men, college students, and seeing their perspective of it has been really great. They're already like, what's the next project? They've done a lot with veterans, and that's something that we've talked about doing too, is a project around like Cherokee veterans. And people don't realize how much the native population has kind of served in the military and how big a part of that they've been. So that might be kind of down the line.
Yeah, I think, the exciting part about research is as you're working on a project, you always uncover like 10, 15, 20 more projects that you have to do.
Gosh, yeah, that's not a problem. I have too many ideas, and I'm like, I have to like really rein it in. But it's easy when you have people that you can kind of lean on to just bounce ideas off of and support your work. It means the world.
Yes, and maybe we can bring you to Wisconsin. We do have
Yes.
some young girls in, I believe they're in Oneida, who are doing boxing and raising awareness about missing and murdered Indigenous women.
Yes. Well, I have to brag too for a minute. I have a friend who she actually played at University of Wisconsin, that we literally recently just met in like October. And she played at Wisconsin. It was probably 90s. Like she's probably a little bit older than me, but so maybe she's like in her 40s. But she was Hall of Famer at Wisconsin, and she got asked. So she lives in kind of the Minneapolis area, and she got asked to be on the local organizing committee for the women's Final Four. And so I'm gonna throw the link in the chat. And so she actually reached out to me and Brent Cowie of Indiansports.com, a couple other people kind of across the country that are kind of doing this work, advocating for Native athletes. And basically when she was asked to be on the committee, she was like, I'll do it if you let me like basically indigenize the tournament. And so we're gonna do all kinds of really cool stuff at the Final Four in a couple weeks. I'm so excited. I'm actually gonna take some students, but we're gonna have, you know, not only land acknowledgements, but like halftime shows. We're gonna do a kids clinic. The games are on Friday and Sunday, and so we're gonna have the clinic on Saturday, kind of in conjunction with like the Milwaukee Bucks and some other organizations. And we've been fundraising and just doing really just amazing how cool it's been to kind of grow this organically. And it's something that we see long term too, basically being kind of like advisors to these organizations like the NCAA, NFL, kind of all these big sports leagues, to show them like, hey, this is how you do this right and how you really engage the Native community. And so absolutely, yeah, I'm so excited to kind of come out, and would love to come to Wisconsin too at some point and meet the group. I love kind of going to seeing all these different college university groups of Native students. It's so fun to see, because we were literally just starting it when I was in college. And so now it's so fun to see kind of it grow and having these tribal councils and these things like that at these universities. Because it's so needed. Like they need to have that connection. They need to have that family kind of away from family. So just kudos. I'm excited for your new director and the whole thing.
Yeah, when you were in undergrad, you started the center, right?
It was actually the Native American Student Association. Yeah, we actually got a actual space when I was in doing my PhD, and so it's been fun to see that kind of live on, and see these kind of just pop up. Like it's more of the norm now to see universities have these groups than not, which is really great to see. Because I'm such a proponent for Native students going on and you know, just finding what they're passionate about. It doesn't have to be sports, right? It can be just about, you know, anything. It can be filmmaking, it can be music, it can be art, it can be so many things, chemistry, science, you know, there's so much out there. And so it's just fun to see kind of the students kind of living up to that potential and giving back, either by going back to their home community or just kind of paving the way for other people to kind of come along.
I think you and I would both agree that sports are pretty great, especially when we're looking at the intersection of gender and culture.
Super biased. Yeah, sports all day. Yeah, it's just, what better kind of reflection of society do you have out there? So it's such a great piece to kind of, and just a window into so much other things that you can create change with.
Yes. Awesome. Well, I didn't see any questions come in, so we can wrap up. But thank you so much for sharing the film, for all of the work that you've done to share and preserve these stories. And I'm excited to see your work continue. And yeah, is there anything you wanted to close out with?
No, I'll follow up with you with the 30th event if you can join, and then we'll just stay in touch, and just encourage everybody to stay in touch and feel free to reach out. And I look forward to seeing you, Layla, when I'm home and catching up and see people and staying connected, and just thankful for everyone for their time, because it really means the world.
Thank you.
All right.